Now, switching back over here to Server 2, throughout these last couple of demonstrations, you may have been sitting back and wondering, gosh, Greg, it would be nice to be able to follow along, but what you're doing involves the use of an Active Directory domain, and we haven't built one yet. Well, that's actually something I've done a bit on purpose, because our conversation here on Windows PowerShell and DSC is an area where we can use some of the power of desired state configuration to go about rapidly deploying an Active Directory domain for this course and potentially for other courses that you may see fit. Well, right here on Server 2, I want to talk a bit not only about the creation of that Active Directory domain, but also some of the very basics of how desired state configuration management works. It's worth mentioning that the setup of a production-worthy DSC infrastructure is something that goes far beyond what we can do in this little task here in this greater course. Here in the Pluralsight catalog, we have actually a number of different courses on DSC that will take you much further into the weeds in terms of how you actually build DSC in an environment where you would roll this out into production. But what I want to do here, again, on this machine is use our task in setting up DSC specific to this single computer as an opportunity for us to take a look at some of the different ways in which these DSC documents can be brought to bear. You'll see here I have 3 different folders that I've created that include 3 different configuration scripts to be used by DSC. What's first important to recognize is that although we've talked about Windows PowerShell here so far, Windows PowerShell and DSC itself are very different in the ways that they go about actually enacting change on your computers. We have already gone through the efforts of adding, for example, the file services role service onto this computer, and we did so by entering a PowerShell command that install Windows feature commandlet to go ahead and tell the machine to then install the different functionality associated with our file services role service. DSC is very different in that instead of telling a machine to do something, DSC rather tells it to be something. And I know this sounds like semantics, and in fact, in a way, it kind of is. But the reality is that DSC accomplishes its tasks in a very different way. Let us assume, for example, that we have need for a DHCP server. In the traditional PowerShell world, we might start that by choosing the same commandlet again. So install Windows feature, for example, and then the DHCP feature onto this machine. This is, as I said, telling the machine to install all of those items, all those prerequisite components for DHCP services. What's different over here within DSC is that rather than telling it to do something, this configuration document here rather tells it to become something. We are creating a function here, a configuration item called server2 that corresponds with the node name server2 right here. Again, everything that I'm telling you here has to do with executing these documents locally on the console of these machines. For this configuration that we're creating, we have a keyword here called Windows feature, the use of which can be used for telling the machine to become something, which in our case here will be a DHCP server. The 2 keywords we're looking for here is name DHCP and ensure present. These correspond with the actual Windows feature or Windows role service that we want to install. And this DHCP server item up here is simply used as a label so that we can identify which ones we're actually referring to. There are indeed quite a bit of brackets here that contain all of these items that we're working with. But the long and short of it is that this very simple document here, once we execute it right down here at the bottom, and then start the DSC configuration, will tell this machine locally to become a DHCP server. Let me go ahead and run this so we can see an example of how this would actually work once it moves, or once we actually execute this document against the server. I'll go here to users and then G Shields and then to the desktop, and then I need to go to that server 2 location right here. It's in this server 2 location where you can see all the different files that exist here, which in this case is that single PS1 file. There are actually 2 different PowerShell commands that are run here in order to actually start this process. The first of which is to execute the function that we've created right up here at the top, the configuration function. This will create what we call a MOF file, which is a slightly less readable version of the configuration that we just created, which itself is then used as part of the DSC configuration down here on line 13 for then instructing the machine to begin the process of becoming this DHCP server. Let me start that process by executing the PS1, so server2.ps1. two things will happen. The first of which being the creation of the moth file, and the second of which being the actual installation of DHCP services to become that DHCP server. Now, back to the semantics of what we're talking about. Yes, indeed, in order to be something, you do have to do something. But the beauty here of DSC is that all of that other to-do portion of what we're talking about is there layered underneath the covers. We don't have to worry about all the to-do pieces because we can just simply tell our servers to be something, and this keyword and all the functionality associated with this keyword will contain the necessary code to tell it to get there, the steps it needs to get to that point. Once we've concluded with this, you can see here that we have had a successful installation of DHCP services onto this machine. And if we went through and verified, indeed, we would be able to see that DHCP services now exist here on this computer. So this is an example, a very simple example of how DSC can be used to tell a machine to become something.